Crises of Humanity, Chapter-9, Free Trade and Environment, Movement of Goods and the Disruption of Circulation. The global environment can be easier understood by viewing the environment as circulation systems. Environmental destruction means destroying natural circulations endowed to the earth, such as water circulation, biological circulation, and so on. Increasing the volume of circulation increases the purifying capability of the earth, and as a result, consumption can be increased. The way to have plenty of circulation volume is to shorten the distance goods need to move as much as possible. The longer the moving distance, the more circulation will be bypassed, reducing overall circulation. For example, exporting food means exporting water and soil. The soil becomes impoverished, leading to a decrease in the volume of circulation and resulting in the fall of production volume. Compensating the soil with chemical fertilizers and groundwater will only lead to desertification. The agricultural land of nations that have been forced to import food will become abandoned, impoverished fields, leading the soil to collapse. International division of labor due to the movement of agricultural products destroys agricultural soil, and as a result reduces total world production volume. Furthermore, movement of goods involves increased emission of carbon dioxide. Therefore, the longer the distance of the movement, the more detrimental effect to circulation and consequently to the life environment. Just in terms of the manufacturing industry, if 10 tons of raw materials were imported and 3 tons of products were produced and exported, 7 tons of waste will remain as pollution. Furthermore, the importing country's manufacturing industry and therefore employment levels will shrink. Although various free trade agreements are currently under negotiation, none of them seem to address global environmental issues such as soil conservation and carbon dioxide emission reduction. It is quite curious, as if the emerging crisis of the biosphere seems to be none of their business. I don't think that the ongoing trade liberalization negotiations, where everyone competes to sell to each other goods the other doesn't even need at a cheaper price, will make the consumer happy. I will touch on this subject later in why imported goods are inexpensive, but the reason why goods are cheap must be due to some unreasonable production process. Isn't the primary objective of trade is to exchange what the other lacks, and isn't this the basis for a human to live in solidarity? If you don't like to be sold what you do not need, then you shouldn't sell to others what they do not need. What is at the back of these trade talks are political contributions by huge corporations seeking an oligopolistic market. Thus, it seems to me that the outcome of trade liberalization negotiations is decided by the amount of political contributions. The result in many cases lacks fairness and will adversely affect the developing nations. In retrospect, the introduction of large-scale retail stores location law in Japan must have been based on the long-term globalization strategy of long-distance mass transportation using international capital. The introduction of large-scale retail stores location law, which interrupts global circulation by long-distance transportation, has been a factor to degrade the life environment. I know this may not be realistic, but isn't trade liberalization based on protecting the life environment, the freedom for humans to move and live? Birds and mammals have lived without damaging the earth by doing so. Nowadays, I feel like the borders exist as an illusion for people in power. This is how I felt every time I flew over the borders. In a different sense, those large multinationals also seem not to have an idea of borders and homeland. Locally consumed, local production increases circulation. A small society is ideal. The best way to enrich the circulation of a region and reduce waste pollution, thus saving the life environment, is to consume locally produced products and recycle them into the local soil. Recently, as one of the measures to protect the country's economy, locally consumed local production is being recommended. Locally consumed local production will enrich the circulation and reduce environmental pollution. This is a culture that embodies wisdom of living. Because the economy of a region that practices locally consumed local production requires shorter distance of transportation, there will be less bypassing of the circulation system, and as a result, the regional circulation will be enriched and there will be less energy consumption and residual pollutants. The merit of a regional economy is you can see or know the face and heart of the producer and the production process. The economy of locally consumed local production will reinstate the fading human bondage. The more the life environment becomes difficult, the more the human bondage becomes important. It was the same during World War II. The regional price is based on the human bondage, the culture, the way of life, and the balance with the various necessary goods of that region. Because we have chosen imported goods just because they were cheap, relationships with other goods were lost, and as a result shrank the regional community, that is, the human bondage. Living in countryside and seeing the decline in the regional industry and the increased presence of megastores nearby reminds me of the words of a certain economist, "Small is beautiful," which is equivalent to saying that a small society is ideal. The small-sized economy, which requires short distance in transportation and consumes local production, is much better off than the global economic structure, as there will be less environmental pollution and will be better able to withstand crises. In addition, economic relief, if necessary, is easier to implement in a smaller economy. To pass on a better, livable world to the next generation, it is important that we recover the degraded life environment, however difficult the task. It is necessary that we return to locally consumed local production. That is to say, to switch from a globalized world economic structure to a regional economic structure. Importation and exportation, which are merely neutral exchanges of money, reduce human bondage. It is a proven fact that people are less responsible towards exported products. If trouble among nations or food shortage occurs, export with less human bondage will stop instantly. As the global environment is now heading towards degradation, occurrences of imported goods being halted will increase in the future. Even countries with fertile agricultural soil will see an increase in abandoned fields once the country succumbs to trade price competitions and starts importing food products. The soil has become rich over the long years only because of the close relationship with the culture of the region. It will take at least 10 years to restore the soil of an abandoned field. Therefore, instantly resuming agriculture is not possible should the import of food stop due to a conflict between nations. Abandoned fields are actually the undermining of agriculture. The concept can be applied not only to foods, but also to any products. I want people to discuss how we can keep this wonderful earth full of circulation for the next generation as the main agenda for not only trade talks, but also for various global conferences. Japan, with its exceptionally low self-supporting rate of food production and their dependence on long-distance imports, seems to be abnormal, considering the idea that we should restore a sustainable economy by maintaining a rich circulation and reducing residual pollutants. The kind of beautiful scenery of our mother country that I envision to leave for the next generation is a land where there are plenty of water and trees with rich circulation and where people consume local production. This is nothing but the root of life. Why imported goods are cheaper? Other than those mass-produced agricultural products of wealthy countries made possible by the support of the oil industry in the form of pesticides and mechanization with subsidies, the reason for imported agricultural and other products being cheap is because the labor and the oil transportation costs are extremely low. The reason for the low labor cost of the exporting nation is due to the wide gap in wealth between the nations. The cost for transportation is low because it does not include the processing cost of the residual pollutants of the oil. In general, cheap imported goods are manufactured by those people working with extremely low wages, and even a small raise in wages will cause the job to shift to another cheaper country. We cannot call this a fair free trade competition when imports come from countries where low wages are fixed. This structure that makes permanent the difference between the rich and the poor, as well as an unstable society in the developing nations, is at the sacrifice of world peace. Some say that imports from such countries contribute to the employment of the exporting countries. But this is an interpretation of the importing country who benefit from preservation of poverty in exporting countries by way of cheap goods. The world will never be peaceful with such a system. Taxes that have nothing to do with world peace have the highest cost. We simply look at the price of cheap imported good and food, but we should be thinking about those people and children working for only $1 or $2 a day, if at all, in those countries where there is a wide gap between the rich and the poor. There is a big possibility that the raw materials of those expensive branded goods you surround yourself with, or those branded treats that you savor, are produced at the price of the harsh illegal labor of children who have been kidnapped. Adults in monetary difficulties prey mercilessly on children who are in vulnerable positions. The gap between the rich and the poor can be the hotbed of any kind of evil. Think about any society, the process by which foods and goods are produced, and how they are transported to the shops. You may find more bondage with the people in the world. I want the realities of the gap between the rich and the poor in the world and the production process to be taught at school to foster considerate consumers, or as an official subject in the food education in the school system, so that the next generation can have a peaceful world. The conflict over water between the rural and industrialized urban area, the urbanization of the world, and food import in Japan. It is said that 1,000 tons of water is necessary to produce 1 ton of crops. In industrial production, water is also necessary for cooling and rinsing. Moreover, using a liter of oil consumes tens of liters of water. Therefore, agriculture and industry are in competition over water. In those nations where the water supply is not sufficient, water tends to be used for industry rather than agriculture, where there is a higher added value and therefore more foreign currency can be earned. In such nations, rather than for circulation agriculture, namely locally consumed local production, agricultural land and water tends to be used for industrial agriculture and industries. This will cause the reduction of agricultural products in the world. Those farmers who become dispossessed of their lands and water supply will head for urban areas as so-called unemployed refugees, and become the cause of social unstableness. These increasing rural refugees are one of the reasons of the surging urban population, and is becoming one of the features of urbanization in countries where the difference between the rich and poor are wide. There is a strong possibility that these people who have lost their agricultural land, or those who lose their jobs in urban areas, are joining terrorist organizations. Here I would like to remind you that there is another issue regarding mass food imports into Japan. Food is created by converting water and greens. It seems strange that such a nation, like Japan, which has plenty of water and greens, imports huge amounts of food products from nations that don't have sufficient water and greens. As a result, such nations will deplete their water supply and soil, exploit low-wage workers, reduce the agricultural lands in their own nation, which will lead to the depopulation of the rural area and the lowering of their food self-sufficiency ratio. This is a basic issue for a nation. Japan is rich in the resources of life. Rice paddy cultivation is the wisdom of circulation. Japan, with plenty of greenery and water resources, is called as nation of forests. I always felt at home when I flew back from those nations where there are less greenery compared to Japan, where you have 4 beautiful seasons. The ultimate resource of life are water, greenery, and the soil, and we can always rely on the sun to shine. Therefore, it is strange that Japan, with its plentiful resources, is often characterized as a nation without resources. I have seen many nations, but Japan is one of the few nations that possesses plenty of the resources of life. Although global warming may lead to climate change, countries such as Japan that have plentiful resources of water and greenery have a strong vitality to survive. As far as I can remember, clean water was not a thing to be bought, but something that was available free of charge. Only when I went to other countries did I realize that tap water tasted bad and people would pay for drinking water. Based on the information that even water of the large rivers do not even reach the estuaries, water shortage will become more serious than oil shortage. Although oil is an essential natural resource, it is a secondary resource for life, as it is not circulating and will be consumed at the end. In the coming decades, which will experience the degradation of the living environment, areas with plentiful water will be more important than the oil-producing nations, and there will be more disputes for water. We will enter an era where protecting water will become essential. In a world faced with water shortage, it is quite possible that Japan, which has abundant water resource, will become a target for those corporations who do water business across the borders. Actually, it is already a reality. If we allow such water business, we should apply progressively increasing fees when the water is exported in order to prevent mass outflow of our water, so precious for life. We cannot expect patriotism from those corporations who do business across borders. We hear stories about buyout of land by people of other nations. These could be the survival policies of these other nations, buying out the land for water business. We need to do something before this becomes an issue. Cold-hearted reality of diplomacy may cause armed disputes when it comes to the issue of survival. Water circulation is the most valuable free gift from our earth. Rice paddy cultivation, which takes maximum advantage of circulation, a free force of the nature, is truly a wisdom of the culture. Rice paddy culture integrates humans with circulation. As long as there are rice paddies, we can sustain life. 2/3 of our body is composed of water, of which a few liters are drained from our body daily. Only clean water can compensate this loss. We can say that water is the body itself. A person weighing 60 kilograms will only weigh 20 kilograms if water is removed from the body. If we don't drink water for 10 days, the body will be dehydrated by sweating and urination. The blood becomes thick by stagnated circulation, and death occurs due to accumulated waste in the body. Water is the ultimate resource. Selling water other than for the purpose of aid is like selling your life. Nations with water shortage are increasing. The waters in their large rivers don't even reach the estuary. I am wondering how long Japan will depend on food products from such nations. End of Chapter 9.